Text from my mother came in at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning while I was still in my pajamas, measuring out flour for a sourdough starter. Don't forget the dentist appointment for your grandfather. Love you, sweetie. That's how she signed every message back then. Sweetie, hon, with a little heart sometimes. The kind of texts that look like love if you don't know what to look for. I knew what to look for. My name is Tessa. I'm 29 years old. I work as a forensic bookkeeper for small businesses in northern Vermont, which is a fancy way of saying that people pay me to find out where their money went when they already suspect they know. I've been doing it for 6 years. Before that, I was a kid who watched her mother lie about grocery money and a teenager who watched her father gamble away 2 cars and a savings account meant for her college. So when I tell you that I notice things, I want you to understand that this isn't a quirk. It's a survival skill that grew into a job. My grandfather, the man my mother was so concerned about getting to the dentist, is named Walter. He's 81. He has the kind of hands that look like they belong to a man who built 2 houses and rebuilt 3 engines, because that's exactly what he did. He raised me from the time I was 11, after my mother decided that motherhood didn't suit her, and left for what she called a fresh start in Phoenix, with the man who would later become my stepfather. She came back 4 years later. By then, I was Grandpa's, not legally, just in the way that matters more. I'd moved back in with him 18 months before all of this started. His house, the one in the hills outside Burlington, with the long gravel driveway and the sagging back porch he kept saying he'd fix, he'd been falling more. The stairs had become a problem. His doctor used the word Lewy body for the first time at an appointment in March, and I drove home that night and cried in the bathroom while he watched a baseball game in the living room because I didn't want him to know yet that I knew. The fall I'm talking about, the one where everything tipped, started in late September. My mother and her husband, my stepfather Brent, started visiting more. That was the first thing. They lived 2 hours away in a development outside Saratoga Springs, and for almost 6 years they'd visited maybe twice a year. Always around the holidays, always with a complaint about the drive. Suddenly, they were there every other weekend. My mother brought casseroles she clearly bought from the deli and tried to pass off as homemade. Brent brought a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and a habit of wandering into rooms he had no business being in. The second thing was that my mother started asking about the house. Not in any way you could point to. Just questions. Did Grandpa ever talk about what he wanted done with it? Had he updated his will recently? Wasn't it a shame how the porch was getting in such bad shape? And wouldn't it be easier on everyone if he just moved somewhere smaller? She said the word easier, the way other people say expensive, like it cost her something to even use it. I said as little as possible. I'd learned by then that the less I gave my mother, the less she had to twist. I'd watch Grandpa eat soup at the kitchen table, and I'd see her doing the math behind her eyes. She didn't know I could see it. She'd never bothered to know me well enough to learn what my face looked like when I was paying attention. The third thing was the mail. I'm the one who gets the mail. I do it because Grandpa's knees don't like the front steps anymore, and because the mailbox is at the end of a 100-yard driveway, and because, frankly, I like the walk. In late October, I started noticing pieces of mail that didn't make sense. A welcome letter from a bank Grandpa had never used, a statement for a credit card he didn't have, 2 pieces of correspondence from a notary service in Albany, New York, both addressed to him but both from a state he hadn't lived in for 52 years. I opened them. I'm not proud of opening someone else's mail, but I'm not sorry either. The notary service letters were appointment confirmations, both dated in the past, both for documents that had apparently been notarized in his name, both at an address in Albany that I didn't recognize. I sat on the bottom step of the porch with that envelope in my lap for a long time. There's a particular kind of quiet that happens when you understand something terrible. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's just a small, clean click in your chest, like a deadbolt sliding into place. I had it then. I sat there until the click was done, and then I got up, and I went inside, and I made my grandfather a grilled cheese sandwich, and I did not say a word. That was the night I started the file. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I know it sounds like I sat on information for too long, and I've thought about that a lot since, and I'll explain. But that night I opened a new folder on my laptop and I named it Walter, and I started putting things in it. Photos of the suspicious mail, a screenshot of his credit report, which I pulled the next morning with his permission after I sat him down at the kitchen table and told him I thought something was wrong. He looked at me for a long minute before he said, very quietly, I figured. I just didn't want it to be them. He cried a little. I cried a little. Then we got to work. Here's what we found in the first week. There was a home equity line of credit opened on his house 6 months earlier, and the amount of $110,000. He had never applied for it. The signature on the application was a competent forgery of his hand. There were 2 withdrawals already, $40,000 in May, $35,000 in August, both wired to an account at a regional bank, the routing number of which I recognized immediately because I'd seen it on enough check stubs to know it was where my mother kept her checking. There was a credit card in his name, with a balance of $11,000, used at restaurants and a furniture store in Saratoga Springs and a marina in Lake George. There were 3 life insurance policies he'd never heard of, where my mother was named the beneficiary, all opened within the last year, all with him as the insured party. And there was a partial draft, found later in a folder Brent left on the dining room table during a visit, of a quitclaim deed, unsigned, listing my mother and Brent as the grantees and Grandpa as the grantor of the house and the 7 acres of land it sat on. The handwriting on that draft was Brent's. I have a sample. I've had a sample for years from a Christmas card he wrote me in 2019, which I kept because something about him already, even then, felt like a thing I might one day need a sample of. Grandpa wanted to call the police. I asked him to wait 2 weeks. I want you to understand why. I'm a forensic bookkeeper. I know how these cases go. If we'd called that morning, the police would have taken a report. They would have eventually contacted my mother. She would have lawyered up. She would have moved the money, what was left of it, or claimed she had his verbal permission, or claimed dementia made his statements unreliable. She would have stalled until the trail was cold and the only person who could clearly testify, my grandfather, was a man whose memory was already beginning to slip. I'd seen this exact pattern in a case my firm consulted on the year before. The grandmother lost. The son took the house. There's a particular kind of helplessness that legal systems create when they move slowly against people who move fast. I needed to move faster than they did, and I needed Grandpa to be safe first. So in those 2 weeks, here's what I did. I called my older sister, Joanne. She lives in Portland, Maine. She's 34, married, 2 kids, works as a respiratory therapist. She and I have not had an easy relationship. Joanne stayed with our mother through the worst of it, the years I lived with Grandpa, and there was a long time where I think she resented me for getting out. But she's straight, in the moral sense. She doesn't bend. When I called her at 9:30 at night and told her what I'd found, she was on the road by midnight. She drove all the way down through the dark and slept on Grandpa's couch in her clothes, and we sat at the kitchen table the next morning with 3 cups of coffee and a yellow legal pad, and we made a plan. This is the part where I have to tell you that what we did was hard, not just emotionally. Logistically, we met with an elder law attorney named Margaret Hennessy out of Montpelier, who specialized in this exact kind of case. She was 60-something, sharp as a paring knife, and within an hour of seeing what we had, she was telling us about the structure that would protect him. We moved fast. Grandpa, with full mental capacity confirmed by his physician in writing, executed a new revocable trust with Joanne and me as co-trustees and himself as the sole beneficiary during his lifetime. The house and the land were transferred into the trust. His remaining liquid assets, what wasn't already gone, about $240,000 across 2 savings accounts and a small inherited IRA, were also moved. The accounts they had been in were closed. New accounts at a different bank, in the name of the trust, were opened. He executed a durable power of attorney naming me as his agent. He executed a healthcare proxy naming Joanne. He revoked any prior powers of attorney that might have existed, whether he remembered signing them or not, which Margaret said was a smart precaution. We did all of this in 9 days. On the 10th day, I made my report to the Vermont Adult Protective Services, with the entire documented case attached. On the 11th day, Margaret filed a civil complaint against my mother and Brent for fraud, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and forgery. On the 12th day, the FBI field office in Albany was contacted because the forged documents had crossed state lines and the bank fraud component made it a federal matter. On the 13th day, we changed every lock on Grandpa's house. On the 14th day, my mother texted me at 6:47 in the morning to remind me about the dentist appointment. The dentist appointment was the day she and Brent were planning to come up. They didn't say so, but I'd seen the email exchange between her and a real estate broker that Joanne had managed to pull from a shared family Google Drive that my mother had forgotten she'd added me to 4 years earlier. The plan, apparently, was to bring a notary with them, to get Grandpa to sign the quitclaim deed under the pretense of estate planning paperwork, to have it filed by close of business in Burlington that same afternoon. I'd seen the email. They thought they were going to walk out of that house with the deed in their hands. I baked them banana bread. I don't know why. I think I needed something to do with my hands while I waited. I made a loaf of banana bread and I put it on a plate in the middle of the kitchen table, and I told Grandpa to stay in his bedroom no matter what he heard, and that if he heard anything that scared him to call Joanne, who was parked at the end of the driveway in her Subaru with the engine running, and a sheriff's deputy named Officer Mendez 2 minutes away by radio. They arrived at 11:15. My mother got out of the passenger side. Brent got out of the driver's side. A third man, who I assumed was the notary, got out of the back. He was holding a leather folio. My mother was wearing a beige cardigan and the small gold cross necklace that she only wears around people she's trying to soften. She smiled at me through the screen door and said, "Tess, honey, can you let us in? It's cold out here." I opened the door. I let them into the kitchen. I offered them banana bread. The notary declined. My mother sat down. Brent stayed standing, which is something he does when he wants to feel taller than the room. He's not a big man. My mother said, "Where's Dad?" I said, "He's not feeling well today. He's resting." She said, "Oh, that's a shame. We brought some paperwork we were hoping he could look over with us. Just some estate things. He'd mentioned wanting to get them sorted." I said, "He hadn't mentioned that to me." There was a small flicker in her face. Just a flicker. I have a particular fondness for that moment in conversations with my mother. The half second where she realizes the script she came with isn't going to work and she has to improvise. She's never been a good improviser. That was always my father's job when he was still around. My mother is a planner, a meticulous, patient, surgical planner. And in that half second, I saw her recalculate, and I knew, with a certainty that came up through my feet, that the next thing out of her mouth was going to be a lie I'd remember for the rest of my life. She said, "Oh well, it was just something he and I had talked about over the phone. You know how forgetful he's getting?" I said, "Mom, the house is in a trust now, as of 9 days ago. So is everything else." Brent's jaw moved. I watched it. He didn't say anything. The notary, sitting at our kitchen table with his unopened leather folio, looked from my mother to me and back to my mother, and I could see him beginning to understand, in the way professional people do, that he had been brought to a place he very much did not want to be. My mother said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I'm talking about the HELOC, the credit card, the life insurance policies, the forged signature at the notary office in Albany on May 14th. I'm talking about the $75,000 that left this house in 2 wires and ended up in your TD bank account. I'm talking about all of it, Mom. I have all of it. The Adult Protective Services case number is on the kitchen counter behind you. The FBI is aware. There's a civil complaint that was filed 2 days ago, and you'll be served this week if you haven't been already. The house cannot be transferred. The accounts cannot be drained. There is nothing left that you can take from him. She didn't speak for almost a full minute. Brent did. He started to. He said, "Now wait a minute, Tessa. You don't have any right to." I said, "Brent, I have his power of attorney. I have his medical directive. I have the deed of trust. I have the bank records. I have your handwriting on a draft quitclaim deed in this house that you left on this dining room table in September. I have your wife's emails to a real estate broker named Karen Vrolik. I have a photograph of the rental car that you and my mother drove to Albany on May 14th, taken by a traffic camera on Route 7. I have everything I need. What I have specifically given you, by sitting here and talking to you instead of having the police already at the door, is the chance to leave my grandfather's house right now without being arrested on his front porch in front of his neighbors." The notary stood up. He said, "I'm going to wait in the car." He left. He walked very fast. I almost felt bad for him. My mother was crying. Not real crying. She has a particular kind of cry that's mostly throat and very little eye, and she was doing it then. She said, "Tessa, you don't understand. We were trying to help him. We were trying to—" I said, "Mom, he raised me. You didn't. You left, and you came back, and you left again, and you came back, and the whole time he was the one who was here. The whole time. And what you've done to him, what you tried to do to him, I will never in my life forgive. Get out of his house." She got out of his house. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after they drove away. Joanne came in. She'd been watching from the driveway with her hand on her phone the whole time. She sat down across from me and she didn't say anything, just put her hand on top of mine, and we sat there until Grandpa came out of his bedroom in his slippers and his old Red Sox sweatshirt, and he looked at us and Joanne said, "It's done, Daddy." He cried. He cried for a long time. I want to tell you the rest fast, because the rest is what people always want to know, and I don't want to draw it out. The civil suit went forward. My mother and Brent were served the following Monday. They tried, initially, to claim that Grandpa had given verbal authorization. Margaret's case dismantled that in about 6 weeks. They tried to argue diminished capacity and lost because we had 3 independent physician evaluations from the relevant period. They tried to settle. We let them, but on our terms. They returned approximately $91,000, which was most of what they had left after spending a chunk of the HELOC money in a down payment for a boat that they'd been forced to back out of, a vacation to the Florida Keys, and a small portion of a bathroom renovation in their house. The remaining $19,000 they could not return became a civil judgment against them, secured against their primary residence. They will pay it for the rest of their lives. The criminal side was slower. The FBI took the case seriously because identity theft of an elderly relative and bank fraud across state lines is precisely the kind of case they take seriously. Brent was indicted on 5 counts in March. My mother was indicted on 7. They both pled out to lesser charges in the fall, after their lawyers convinced them that a jury in Vermont was not going to look kindly on what they'd done. Brent got 18 months. My mother got 22. She served 14 of them at a federal facility in Connecticut. She wrote me 4 letters during that time. I did not open them. They are in a box in the attic. I may open them someday. I may not. Grandpa is 83 now. The Lewy body diagnosis was confirmed, formally, a year after all of this happened. He is doing well on the medication. He still lives in his own house. Joanne and her family moved up to be closer, and they're an hour away now instead of 4. I'm still with him. I make his meals. I drive him to his appointments. I bake bread on Sundays, and he sits at the table and tells me, sometimes, that the smell reminds him of his mother, who used to bake on Sundays too, in a kitchen I have only ever seen in photographs. He asks about my mother sometimes. Not often. When he does, I tell him the truth. I tell him she is paying for what she did in the ways the law allows, and that the parts the law cannot reach will be carried by her conscience, if she has one, for the rest of her life. He nods. He doesn't argue. I think a part of him grieves her still, and I don't blame him for that. She is, after everything, his daughter. Grief is allowed to be more than one shape. People have asked me, in the time since, whether I regret moving so fast. Whether I regret being the one who saw it and chose to plan and chose to wait the 2 weeks while the trust was being assembled. Whether I should have warned him sooner, told the police sooner, done something, anything, faster. I will tell you what I have come to understand. There is a difference between watching and waiting. Watching is what you do when you have not yet decided to act. Waiting is what you do when you have decided to act, and you are buying yourself the time to do it correctly. I watched for a while, then I waited, then I moved. And when I moved, there was nothing for them to take because everything that could be protected was. That was the work. The hard, quiet, unglamorous work of love that doesn't look like love until you see what it stopped. My grandfather's house has a new porch now. We had it rebuilt last spring. He sits on it in the evenings, in a wooden chair with a cushion my sister made for his birthday. The view from there, across the small valley to the hills on the other side, is the view he has been looking at for 51 years. It is still his. It was always going to stay his. The only thing my mother ever truly took from him in the end was a daughter, which is the one thing she had to give and the one thing he had no way to keep. But she didn't take the house. She didn't take the land. She didn't take the savings. She didn't take the medicine money or the dignity or the chair on the porch or the smell of the bread on Sundays. She didn't take me either in the end. She tried in her way for a lot of years. She didn't get me. What I learned through all of this is that being the one who notices is not a curse. For a long time I thought it was. I thought I had been given some unlucky inheritance of vigilance, a thing that made me lonely at family dinners and tired in ways other people weren't tired. But I understand now. The eye that watches is the same eye that protects. The mind that doesn't trust easily is the mind that doesn't get robbed. Some of us are born into families that require us to learn this early. I was one of them. I am not sorry anymore that I was. The morning after she was sentenced, I made banana bread again. I don't know why. I think it's just what my hands do when I need them to do something. Grandpa came into the kitchen and saw the loaf cooling on the rack, and he smiled and he said, "Smells like Sunday." It was a Tuesday, but I knew what he meant. I cut him a slice. He sat down at the table. We ate together in the quiet, and it was a good quiet, the kind you earn. And outside the window, the sun was coming up over the hills he had always been able to see from his kitchen, and it was still his kitchen, and it was still his son, and it was still his son, and it was still, somehow, after everything, going to be okay. I have thought about that Tuesday morning more times than I can count. The flour on my hands, the phone face down on the counter, the way my mother signed her text with "Love you, sweetie," as if love were a word you could rent by the hour. What I have come to believe, after all of it, is that nothing in a family ever happens by accident. Every betrayal has a long, quiet driveway leading up to it. My mother did not wake up one morning and decide to forge my grandfather's signature. She woke up 1,000 mornings before that and decided in 1,000 small ways that other people were resources to be managed instead of human beings, to be loved. By the time she got to the notary's office in Albany, she had already been practicing for years. The cause was the kind of woman she had spent a lifetime becoming. The effect was a federal indictment and a daughter who would not open her letters. I used to think the gift I had been given was a curse, the eye that watches, the ear that catches the wrong note in a sentence. I spent most of my 20s feeling tired in a way my friends did not seem to feel tired. I see it differently now. What I have, what my grandfather Walter gave me by being the steady man in a tilting house, is not paranoia, it is attention, and attention, paid honestly, is one of the only forms of love that cannot be faked. I want to say something to anyone listening who is the noticer in their family, the one who keeps the spreadsheets in their head, the one who knows which uncle drinks and which cousin lies and which parent is already, quietly, beginning to take. You are not bitter. You are not paranoid. You are doing a kind of work that no one will thank you for, until the day they need you to have already done it. The three things that saved my grandfather were not luck. They were character, planning, and the willingness to keep moving when I was very, very tired. Doing the right thing meant calling my sister Joanne at 9:30 at night, even though we had not been close. Using my mind meant building a case before I made a move. Because emotion without strategy is just noise, the bad people learn to play around. And staying on my feet, through 9 days of paperwork and 3 years of court dates and one 14-month prison sentence I did not attend, meant believing that what I was protecting was worth what it was costing me. It was. He is 83. He still sits on his porch. The bread still cools on Sundays. And the woman who tried to take all of that from him is paying, in the small daily currency of a life she chose, for every dollar she ever thought she was clever enough to steal. Pay attention. Tell the truth. Move when it is time to move. The rest, I have found, takes care of itself.